Welcome back, everybody, to me talking not about Malazan, because that's what will happen tomorrow when we go into Orb, Scepter, Throne. Today, however, we're back to talk about Discworld and a specific Discworld book. This one is book 7 in publication order. It is Pyramids, and we'll talk about that. The next one in publication order is Guards, and we'll talk about that. We have like our usual read-along discussion Zoom chat next Sunday, I think. Yeah, it should be next Sunday unless something terrible happens, which with my life is always possible. If you want to join us, you're very much welcome. Go, I don't know, read the book. It's short. You have 1 week of time. Join us on the Unabridged Burners Discord server, and then join us in a conversation with a bunch of veterans, a bunch of newbies. We just, mostly we just have a lot of fun recapitulating all the terrible jokes in those books. But Guards is the first one of the City Watch books, and is another great entry point into Discworld. So if you have been on the fence so far, or haven't had time to read Discworld or whatever, this one, well, the next one will be a perfect entry point for one of the most beloved sub-series in Discworld, and it is an all-around great book, so maybe that's your chance to join us. I'd be more than happy to welcome you all. It would be glorious to have more people and talk about this, because it's worth it. Anyway, we are talking about another one, which is Pyramids today, which, is all about pyramids. And once again, I got a special beer today from one of my Patreon backers, one of my patrons, that's Charles from Quebec. I hope I didn't butcher the name too brutally. Anyway, he asked me to drink another beer from his home province in Canada, which is obviously Quebec. So I got another one that is La Maudite. It's another strong beer. It has 8% of alcohol. It's a double, which is beer that is first fermented in a barrel and then put into bottles. And then there's a second round of fermentation there to reach a higher level of alcohol. So that's all my beer knowledge right here. It's got 8%. It's got a haunted canoe, which is apparently a Quebecois myth that I don't know about. So maybe I'll find out about it at some point. And it's about a pact with the devil. So that's what I learned about this beer when doing a totally not internet search and just looked at the first Google result. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that beer. We're here to find out how it tastes. And if you feel like you want to force me to drink a specific beer, you're more than welcome to join my Patreon. There's other benefits there. I might even knit you a hat or a scarf or something like that, if that's what you want. But if not, just stay and listen to me ramble about Discworld. But now let's find out about this beer, shall we? Right, I open it. Got myself a beer glass this time around. It's still it's still a cup, so you can't see the actual color of the beer, which I'm sorry about, but I can't see it either, so this is equal opportunity beer drinking. Anyway, it's the clay cup I stole when I was in Belgium, so it's an appropriate beer glass for what we're trying to drink here. Let's see how this will work. I don't want to overdo it. It already has this like slightly sour and sweet smell that you can expect from these very strong beers. And, well, let's find out how it actually tastes. Well, Charles, this one's for you. Cheers. Yeah, I like this. It has a less, unique taste compared to La Fin du Monde, which is the other one that I drank before from the same brewery, which is Unibrew. But it's still, a very solid double, like you are expected from, your Belgian abbeys, your Trappist or other abbeys in Belgium. So I'm enjoying this. It's also much stronger than what I usually drink, so I hope I can do this without getting too off track over time. Anyway, Pyramids, Book 7. Quickly, the very non-spoilery why you should read this. Why it also may be a good point to start your Discworld experience. It is Book 7, but it is a standalone novel. While it is connected with other characters that you may know from other Discworld novels, the setting itself and the main characters are unique to this book and will not show up in any other book. So it's a standalone and a good entry point if you just want to try one book. The setting obviously is pseudo-Egyptian in a way, which, the title Pyramids is something of a giveaway. And it deals a lot with what you might call tradition and identity. Very much with those two things. So it's definitely one of the Discworld novels that is stronger on the themes. There's some that have like a very, very interesting and funny plot, then there's some that are more like episodic, and then there's some that are where the themes are very strong. I would say the Death sub-series is one of those where the themes are a bit stronger. The City Watch books are more about the plot, and there's still like themes in there, obviously, but because they're always there. But yeah. This one is very theme-driven. The plot is okay, but less like the main focus there. Another thing, there's like a slight connection to another one that is one of those beloved standalone novels, that is Small Gods, which we'll come to in a couple of weeks, because it's sort of adjacent to that. So there's the Kingdom of Ephebe, which is like the Discworld's analog to Greece, plays a role here, and there's a bunch of jokes about philosophers there and here. So that's your kind of connection that you have if you want a connection. But you obviously cannot read Small Gods without this one, because there's no plot developments or anything that would be spoiled by the other one. So if you're into a funny book about questions of identity, tradition, and religion, and love really interesting prose and really terrible jokes, this one is probably a really good book for you. I'm not going to rate it because, I don't rate books, and I always think that every single Discworld book is worth your time and worth reading, but I hadn't read this for a while. And rereading it, I found a lot of very interesting things that I personally really, really appreciated about it. So it is much better than I thought it was. It's still not my favorite Discworld novel. That's Nightwatch, if you want to know. But it is a really good book. Let's just leave it at that. So yeah, I guess that's sort of your non-spoilery synopsis kind of thing. It has some strong characters. It has really cool jokes and one-liners and other interesting references to all kinds of stuff. It has an amazing opening scene, and it is really enjoyable. So go read it. That's my review of it. And now let's get into specifics, shall we? All right, so from this point out, this will be spoiler talk, so to speak, because I want to look at some specific aspects of the novel that I think are worth pointing out. And let's start with that amazing opening scene. Now, there's the thing. Terry Pratchett is oftentimes a very cinematic author, by which I don't mean that he has super epic battles or whatnot that would look good on a great screen, but the way he describes scenes are very much in the way that you could describe a movie scene, or the way the camera moves, the viewpoint moves in in a movie. That's what I mean when I say he has a cinematic writing style. And the opening of Pyramids is very much that. It is also just a masterclass in how to do your character and setting introduction to a novel. Because what we have here is Tepik, our main character, who's both the heir, like the new pharaoh of the kingdom of Jelly Baby, and you don't want to know why that is. I mean, that's a terrible joke. It is the Jelly Baby. Anyway, point is, he's also trained as an assassin, and the opening scene, or part of the opening scene, is him preparing for his final examination, which is a practical examination. He has to do like your typical assassin stuff, run parkour over the city and assassinate someone, basically, sort of. And it is written as a sort of a montage because we follow him dressing, doing, starting, and whatnot. And during those situations, we have flashbacks to former, earlier situations in his life, how he gets sent away by his parents to the assassin school, things that happened during the assassin school, and so forth. And the entire setting, the entire basis of the characters and all of that is set up in those flashbacks that happen at appropriate moments in his trip over the city roofs, when he nearly falls from a roof and has his life flashing in front of his eyes, that whole like cliche, and Pratchett just goes and takes that to explicitly say, yeah, and he had his life flashing in front of his eyes, and then he zooms into one of those things that is presumably flashing in front of Tepig's eyes. So I just think that this is overall a very, very good, like almost a perfect way to establish setting and character and tone for a novel in a really interesting and fun opening scene. So yeah, probably one of the strongest opening scenes for a Discworld novel, I would say. Just that whole thing up to the point when when Tepig finishes his exam, basically. That's just like, yeah, I'd like to see someone do better in an opening scene. Just saying. So that's something that I personally really appreciated. Then we obviously have the Assassin's Guild. Now, the Assassin's Guild is something that was mentioned before in Discworld novels, but this is sort of our first like longer or closer look at the Assassin's Guild. There will be more later in other novels, but this is our first. And this is once again one of those points where Terry Pratchett and Discworld kind of parodies fantasy cliches. Now, we've spoken about this before, that like in the first novels, in Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic, Terry Pratchett mostly makes fun of and subverts cliches of specific parts of fantasy, mostly sword and sorcery, and the kind of fantasy that was heavily influenced by Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. And then in later books, he kind of moved away from that towards all kinds of like more real-world issues, social issues, and whatnot. Now, the Assassin's Guild is very much a cliche from mostly, well, both fantasy novels and also mostly tabletop role-playing games. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that the idea of an Assassin's Guild is kind of ridiculous in like real-world terms, sort of. But it is something that has shown up ever since you had, like in fantasy, I would say definitely in Fritz Leiber's Langmar. And Fritz Leiber's Langmar, we've said that before, is the city of Langmar is very much an influence for the city of Ankh-Morpork. Very much. The world of Nehwon, maybe not so much an influence for Discworld, but the overall tone, the idea that you can write fantasy in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way with a lot of ironic distance and so forth, is something that Terry Pratchett very much took from Fritz Leiber. And obviously also Langmar and Fritz Leiber's writings, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, were influential, very influential for Gary Gygax and the early beginnings of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, in Langmar, you have a Thieves Guild, and you have it's not called the Assassin's Guild, it's the Brotherhood of Slayers, I think, Sayers Brotherhood or Slayers Guild. But they're basically exactly that. And the idea of commodifying murder is obviously not something that is, not happening in our world as well. But the idea of having, like, rules to an assassination and making this all, like, is very much playing to the cliches that you have in fantasy. I mean, you have the bunch of fantasy novels nowadays that have all these assassins guilds and kids learning how to kill people. Is it Nevernight, Evernight, whatever, something like that I haven't read? There's certainly that whole assassins thing in the first Brent Weeks trilogy. There's a Night Angel trilogy, which is terrible. Don't go and read that; it sucks. And I have issues with that book, with that trilogy. I might actually do a video on that at some point if I can, force myself to reread it, to actually, base my hatred in facts and not just my memories, which are leaky as fuck. Anyway, the point is, the idea of an assassin's guild that follows specific rules is something that we find both in a few fantasy novels, but mostly in those fantasy worlds, because you kind of need those kind of rules, in-game rules, with stuff like assassins if you're running a tabletop role-playing game, because you know, as a game master, you don't want your player to just go havoc on everyone and just kill everyone because, like, yeah, he's an assassin. Um, interestingly, the assassin character class was actually removed for a while from the main, like, core classes from Dungeons and Dragons, because they figured out that maybe having assassin as a player option is not a good thing when you're already accused of Satanism and all kinds of other stuff in the 80s. The Satanic Panic is one of those really interesting things that you want to look up if you really want to find out how stupid America was in the 80s. To make this not too super anti-American, we had the same issues in other parts of the world. Germany, kind of, because we're late with stuff, had the whole idea of, like, tabletop role-playing games being like a gateway to Satanism and all kinds of other terrible things. And the early to mid-90s, we're just, like, slower with that kind of thing. But with, D&D, it was mostly a thing in the 80s. Anyway, my point is that the Assassin's Guild as an idea was popularized in that, with that background, and Pratchett then goes and subverts it, or turns it up to 11, to show how ridiculous the idea of an actual guild of assassins really is. And he does that also in that opening montage where he introduces both that and the small river kingdom of Jelly Baby with the pharaoh and all the ridiculousness there as well. Because what we have in both of those is that those, like, societies follow very strict, ridiculous rules that hold people back in a way. But anyway, Tepig then gets chosen. Gets chosen is wrong. Tepig inherits the power of the pharaoh, and then we come to the power of belief. Now, that's something that we have spoken of before. It will become even more important in, well, obviously small gods, but other parts as well. The idea of religion or gods and stuff like that in Discworld, which means faith is a sort of power, belief is power, and if enough people believe in something, it becomes real within the Discworld. Now, there's obviously a philosophical background to that we don't want to go into today, but it's one of the fundamental rules of Discworld. So, since the pharaoh of that kingdom is a god king, and has divine powers like making the sun rise every morning and all of that stuff, Tepig takes that over and just has to go back home to do that. Now, we obviously get a bunch of really cool, funny jokes with, having corn grow under his feet, making rivers flood wherever he walks, that kind of thing, which is, interesting and fun. But then he goes back to the river kingdom of the Jelly Baby and tries to actually modernize it. And that's sort of where the other really big thing happens, like big part of the novel takes place, when we come to the themes of tradition and identity. Because this is obviously a very traditional religious kingdom, with the high priest Dios being the the man in charge who invented all the religion and so forth. And it's very clear that having those specific religion, those specific beliefs and traditions of mummifying kings and whatnot, is very much connected to the identity of the inhabitants of that river valley. And we then need to figure out, or what Tepig is trying to figure out, and Dios has a different position there, is like, how much of those traditions can you change without losing your identity, without becoming someone else or something else, and thus, losing that identity, which is sort of the core question there. Now, obviously, it's Pratchett, so crazy shit happens, and we're going to talk about that in a second. What kind of crazy shit do I mean? Well, obviously, we come to that point where through sort of crazy magic stuff, the kingdom gets, drawn to like a pocket dimension where all the religious beliefs become real, all the gods are suddenly real, which is really interesting and fun because it's Pratchett's way to show how ridiculous, or not ridiculous, but like how much of like popular belief is contradictory. And we have all these different sun gods fighting over the sun and all these other things that are suddenly all true at the same time, so they all suddenly all show up when you take things too literal. And which is, another part of like Pratchett's position on religions. Like a lot of that, if you take it too like there are like reasons why people believe in specific things. It's sort of the etiological aspect there. Like you need explanations for specific aspects of life, so you come up with an explanation, even if you have like no scientific proof, which is why you come up with gods that solve stuff. And we'll talk about that when we get to Hogfather, actually. But but suddenly all those things are actually real, and that makes it problematic. Anyway, Tepig flees and tries to figure out what went wrong, and goes to the kingdom of Ephebe, which is an analog of ancient Greece, and talks to a lot of really funny philosophers, and then figures out how he can get back, and then we get a lot of like jokes on sphinxes and all this other stuff, a lot of Trojan War jokes about horses, which is funny. And it's one of those like ongoing jokes that Pratchett does a lot of, and we come back to the Trojan horse thing when we go to the book 9, which is Eric, which is a rather short one. Anyway, the plot isn't that important at this point. It's very much about these ideas as like how we build a society. Is divine right monarchy a really good idea? Is democracy a better way? Also, what Pratchett does here is he certainly pokes a lot of fun at the veneration that you have, at least in like your more conservative parts of Western society, which is especially in the Anglo-Saxon world and the Anglo-American world, which is that crazy veneration of Greek democracy and Greek philosophy. And don't get me wrong, I like all that stuff, but Greek democracy is very far from what you might call democracy today, which is really Pratchett likes to poke fun at the fact that everyone has a vote except women and slaves and poor people and people that are insane and all these other people, when you realize that Greek democracy at the end of the day is not exactly a full-on democracy, because their society is way different, which is the same in Ephebe. It's one of those things that shows up with Pratchett again and again. And I think it's important to have that here, because what we see here is, and that's like an aspect that we should talk about, the depiction of the Jelly Baby as this pseudo-Egypt can certainly be seen as problematic in, ridiculing aspects of a Middle Eastern society in a lot of ways. And there is some truth to that. I would say it's not that bad because, the society lampooned is mostly ancient Egypt, so or the picture, like the pseudo historical picture of ancient Egypt that we might have or may not have. So it's not too much of what you might call colonialist views or whatever, because we're talking about history in a way, or made up history mostly, because we don't know that much stuff about actually ancient society in ancient Egypt, I would say. Anyway, But the other part is that by lampooning the reverence and the highly exaggerated positive image of ancient Greece at the same time, it kind of takes that argument away, because Pratchett is both targeting, what you might call ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, which people in the West, in Europe, would love to make like their inspiration and whatnot for their societies. A lot of the time, anyway. So there's that. Another interesting thing that we see here is certainly what you might call a criticism of capitalism through the character of Chida, who is a smuggler and other things. But the way it is explained is like how actually business, what you might call business and economy, like, is really not that different from your more criminal aspects of smuggling and whatnot. When you get really right down to the bottom of it, because you can couch a lot of criminal activity in the language of business, and at the point where you can do that without actually raising any like big issues, you can probably also couch a lot of the aspects of business life in the language of crime, which is sort of the argument that you could make there if you want to. Which, sure, why not? I'm not stopping you. So before like the sun sets completely, like it kind of has set, but before it gets too dark, let's kind of wrap this up and figure out what I personally really enjoy about this book. There is a lot of like very specific thematic jokes and references. The thinks part definitely. The way the book is split into 4 books: the book of going forth, the book of the dead, the book of the new sun, which is a really good joke, especially when me reading the book of the new sun right now, and the book of 1,000 things that a boy might do. What I also really like is the way Pratchett once again manages to do something really cool. We have those 2 embalmers that are embalming the king, who is there as a ghost, so we have all that stuff, which is a crazy good way to, make fun of or subvert the trope of the funny gravediggers, usually 2 that, you get all the way back to, like, Shakespeare's times when you have the 2 comic gravediggers. Here, the 2 comic embalmers. And what Pratchett manages to do at the same time, once again, and this is one of the strengths of Terry Pratchett in general, how he can, make a lot of funny things, funny jokes and references and all that stuff. And then with like a few lines of dialogue and description, he can really paint you that amazing picture of human life. That amazing, where you just realize that even though those are comic characters, he takes them seriously as people, and is just a really good observer of human life and all the absurdities of human life, and then able to actually depict them amazingly well with very few lines of text, basically. And he does that a lot with those 2, which is really cool. What else do I like? Well, there's obviously the camels being the best mathematicians in the world and the smartest people on the planet, which is obviously a dig at, and he does like explicitly kind of dig at Douglas Adams and Douglas Adams' idea of the dolphins being so super smart. You'll never trust a species that grins all the time. As Pratchett says. Anyway, that's just really funny. There's all these like really cool jokes in there that are, almost your typical, almost once again wander into Monty Python territory, with the with the gods fighting all over that stuff, and one of the priests becoming something of a sports commentator to comment on the fight over the sun by all these different gods and goddesses, which, is just, as a set piece, incredibly funny. And that's something that I just appreciate a lot, how he does that again and again in these, like, seemingly weird, surreal like kind of ways. What else I would say makes this book good or great? Well, the ending. Um, the twist at the ending with Chepik leaving and his sister becoming the queen is a really cool one. There's a transgender thing here, which I also just want to point out for a second, because there's this idea that one of the earlier pharaohs declared that their gender was that they were a man, and from that point, it's one of his great aunts or whatever. That's the idea. It's like declared that that he was a man, and from that point onwards, he was a man. And now this is important here because it's very clear that, well, obviously it's Pratchett and in the '90s, so we're not like at the level of like transgender debate that we have these days, but it's the basic is there. It's like as soon as that person declared that they were a man, they are a man, and you don't even. And we have even that dialogue with Tepik trying to understand. It's like no, they are. They say they are a man. They are a man, which is the basic of how we should deal with transgender. Anyway, just a small bit that is in there that I found interesting. Oh yeah, one of the other things that I really love is the biblical references, especially the the dream of the pharaohs. And like all the pharaohs ever since they started out have this weird dream of the seven fat cows and the seven thin cows, and the thin cow, one of the thin cows doing something weird, some point playing a trombone or probably driving a bicycle or smoking a cigar. But y'all know that story from Exodus. Is it still Exodus? I think it's Exodus. It should be Exodus. The story of Joseph, the helper of the Pharaoh, like who was sold into slavery by his siblings, and then becoming the advisor of the Pharaoh and helping to interpret that dream of the seven cows. The seven is like rich years and seven poor years and all that stuff. Anyway, having that dream show up every time is like sort of the things like you're a true pharaoh, part of the true pharaoh's family if you have that weird cow dream. It's just really funny in a lot of ways. I really appreciated that. Again, I like me some Bible jokes. They're good most of the time. Yeah, there's a lot of like really cool jokes and references and whatnot. There's a Napoleon quote in there that is funny and interesting, and all the other stuff. But just for reading that opening montage of Tepik, that alone makes this book worthwhile reading to me, because I kind of forgot how that was done. This time reading it, I just felt able to appreciate it in just all its brilliance, because there's everything in those opening pages is just perfect. Yeah, anyway, I better cut this ramble. Go read the book. It's fucking amazing. Or if you have already read the book, let me know what you really liked about it. If you feel like liking the video, that would be great. If you feel like subscribing to the channel, that would be also great. If you feel like joining us for the next one, which will be Guards, join us on the Unabridged Burners the Discord server, and there will have the link to the Zoom call with all the other readers. So we talk about Guards next Sunday in the evening, 7 p.m. I think, European time, which is GMT +2, I think. Anyway, join us there. It would be great. I'd be glad to have you there. Have a great rest of the weekend. Cheers.